BetaFlight Throttle Hover. BetaFlight Throttle Hover, that's what we're looking at today. BetaFlight 4.6, there is a new thing called Throttle Hover, and it lives in the rates profile section of BetaFlight. What it allows us to do is to customize the expo curve even more, so that we get the best out of our drone. It's going to increase the resolution at which we fly hover point, giving us better control, better stability, and it's going to increase our flying experience. If you want to learn how to do this, stick around. I'm going to show you all the tips that you will need to make your flight experience the best on your drone. Let's get to it. Right, it's now day 2, but we're doing part 1. But we do part 2 on day 1, but we're doing part 1 on day 2, just to clear that up. Right, what we're going to do first off is dive into the way that BetaFlight intended throttle hover to be used. And the idea behind this is that throttle hover allows you to set where you like to have your midpoint on your stick for your throttle and have your hover exactly where you want it to be. So if you like to fly at 60% as your hover, you can set your hover point at 60% of throttle, and then your expo will flare out from those points. So that's what we're going to do first. We're going to set it up in the way BetaFlight intended, and then in part 2 I'm going to go through how I set it up. Now the difference is the way I set it up is I want to be able to tailor the expo curve below and above separately, and I use a little cheat for doing that. I change where the throttle mid is and make it below the hover point, but you'll find all that out in part 2. For now, if you just want to work out how this is done as intended by the developers, then this is how it's done. Set your throttle mid to 0, hover point to 0, throttle expo to 0, all to 0, hit save. Jump into your quad, and again I've used this, I'll explain in part 2 as well, I've used this on my little tiny whoops, 5 inches, cine whoops, makes no difference, the process is exactly the same. I'm going to hop into the goggles, and what we're going to pay attention to is in the bottom right, and that is, hit record, and that is the throttle value in the bottom right hand side there. It's going to be really quick, we'll just take it out, find where our hover point is. It's at 40, 41 we're going up, 39 we're going down. That is literally all we need. Simple as that. 40 is where we're hovering, 39 we're going down, 41 we're going up. So we take those values that we've just learnt, plug the drone back in, back into BetaFlight, PID tuning, rate profile settings, our hover point is at 0.4. Now ignore the fact this is actually 37% throttle, nothing tallies up anymore, and you'll hear me say that a lot throughout the video. None of it makes any sense anymore in terms of the on-screen display. What you need to know is the metrics to begin with and just punch them in. Ignore what the real values are at the back end. The real value for hover on this is 36% output, but ignore that. You'll see why it doesn't make any difference in a second. Now my throttle mid, I'm going to fly this in the middle of the stick, or just below. I'm going to put 0.45, and that means 45% of the way up between the bottom and the top, 45% just below midpoint is where I want my mid, and that's where throttle's going to be. So the idea is, if I set my controller there to 45% input, we're showing 40% output, which is where our hover point was. If, let's say, I like to fly this for some really weird reason down at 30% on my controller, now when I move my controller to 30%, my transmitter and the receiver shows here at 30% as well, our hover value is the output, so 40% is our output. So basically, wherever the throttle mid is, and this is, have it wherever we like it, it sets that as the hover point. So if I like it just above halfway, if we're one of those weirdos that flies with the throttle mid above halfway point at 52%, if I then bring the receiver to 52%, you can see it's putting 0.4 as the throttle, as the hover point, and throttle hover. So I myself probably have it around 45-ish%, just below mid, so I've got a little bit more resolution, and that's where my fingers are most comfortable. Then I'm just going to set my expo to how I want it, in this case 0.65, save that, and it's as simple as that. You get to set your expo like you did in 451. The only difference is we are setting our midpoint, our throttle mid, where we want the throttle to be at our hover point. And that is the intended function of this particular update. So now if I take it out for a flight and find... Am I recording? No, let me stick it on the floor. Record. Right, we're on the floor. Let's stick it up. So now if we take off and have a look at our throttle percentage, a hover is still going to say 40, which it is, but I've got a load of extra resolution in that stick mid. I can control my hover really nicely, look. And I've got a load of stick movement to control me there. I'm 41%. And if I look at my actual controller, how am I going to do this? Where it is, yeah, we're just below the midway mark. We're at 45% on the controller. So it's done exactly what it said it would do, which is set our hover point where we wanted it, which is at 45%. It's that simple. Now, what this doesn't allow us to do is customize the expo curves above and below where we are. Why would you want to do that? Well, you might want to do that in case when you're coming off the throttle it's not sinking at the rate you'd expect, or if you want to have a different expo below the curve or below your hover point to above, then you can smash on to part 2, which is how I like to configure my drones. And we're going to cheat. We're basically going to take the throttle midpoint and put it below the throttle hover point to separate out the two parts of the expo and then play around with that. So let's move on to how I've managed to butcher this and make it work for me. On to part 2.
Several months later.
Right, let's get on with it. No nonsense. Just to let you know, I've tried this method on my XI20. Worked beautifully. I've also tried it on my QAV S behind me, the 5-inch. Again, worked beautifully. They're both running BetaFlight 4.6 on the latest dev version. The piece that we're talking about today is the hover point edition. And it's not just the hover point that's been added, it's the whole way that the curve is produced has been changed within BetaFlight. I believe it now uses a 12-point Bezier curve and calculations behind that to create the expos. And the biggest difference that I could tell you is probably, actually show you, is by showing you this throttle curve here. Now, you may notice if I have my throttle on my receiver, it is at 0% on here. My receiver goes from -100 to +100%, so it's 200%. We'll just pretend it's at 50% for the sake of it, okay? It's halfway. If we look on here, we can also see that my throttle input is 50%, and the output is also 50%. Nothing really revolutionary about that. However, go to 0%. Oh look, 0% is also 0%. Great stuff. 101%, which is what this normally goes to, is now 102%. Again, fine, it's about right. The interesting stuff comes when we hit 25%. Because 25% input on my receiver, on my transmitter, sorry, on my TX16, is about 37% output. That's weird. But also 75% input doesn't equal 75% output, it equals 63% output. So what's going on here is we've actually gained a whole bunch of resolution in the center by default. The curves don't match up anymore. In 452, 451 and earlier, this straight linear line meant 10% in, 10% out, 20% in, 20% out, and so on. That's changed. So the problem is with this is we have now a point where the on-screen display is a calculation on the Bezier curve and not necessarily the input or the output, and you'll see that reflected in the video. It's a bit strange. So it's difficult to really plan and predict what's going to happen because the on-screen display throttle value is completely different to what you're seeing on the receiver, even in here, in input versus output. They're entirely different. But it's fine. And I'll show you why it's fine. Set your throttle mid to 0.5, hover point to 0.5, and throttle expo to 0, and hit save. This drone is cooking, so I'm just going to cool it down so I have some on-screen display. I'll try and do this whole thing in one take as well, so you can see this happening real time. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this out for a quick hover flight. Now, the reason why all this matters and what we're actually going to be setting here, the reason why it makes a huge difference, is pretty straightforward. I'll leave that to cool down and I'll talk about why it matters on here. if we're flying, let's say we like to fly, we fly with our throttle here at the midpoint, and we're moving this the tiniest amount, and we've all had those drones, haven't we, where we've had that really small amount of movement, less than a millimeter, and it's kind of going between falling out the sky and ripping itself up towards the moon, and that sensitivity there is crazy. Now we can scale the throttle on the transmitter, but what happens then is we're taking, if you imagine a piece of rubber with 2 dots on it, and you stretch the rubber, those 2 dots become further apart, but they're still 2 dots. It's no good, because what you're doing, you're effectively keeping the same resolution, you're just moving the distance in between those dots. And ultimately, if you've got a point where 40% throttle, your drone's going up, and 39% throttle, your drone's going down, you still can't balance it in between those points, because it's either saying I'm 39 or 40. So what we want to do is have more dots in between, and that's increasing the resolution between where the drone goes up and where the drone goes down. And you can't do that by scaling on your transmitter. It's got to be done on the flight controller. The flight controller can add resolution in and then translate that into pulse width modulation that goes out towards your ESC, so it can control it properly. Now the Bezier curve that's generated in 4.6 is a 12-point Bezier curve. The reason why it's not more than 12 points is because there just simply isn't the amount of memory and CPU capability on some of the older flight controllers. So it's going to try and help some of the older FCs out while still maintaining a good amount of throttle resolution. But the primary aim here is to increase resolution where we fly the most, in the center of that stick. That's where we gain accuracy in height for flying through things or for maintaining straight and level flight. It's where we would trim. It's where everything happens. It's the golden moment. Enough waffling. What are we going to do? So instead of stretching those apart, we're actually going to pack more dots into a smaller space. And the way that's reflected is, we'll see on the curve a little bit later, is where you'd normally have a curve going, I'll use this as an example, going like this, upwards. The steeper that curve, then the more it's going to go up within a shorter distance across. More up, less across. If you imagine it's this way, and ever so slightly tilted, lots of across, not so much up. And this is great. This gives you control, because it means you've got a lot of stick movement versus not a huge amount of difference in output. Okay, so you're flying like this. Now, if it were too flat, you'd move your stick loads and you wouldn't really increase or decrease the power that much. And it would be really kind of, I don't know, lazy. The throttle would be very lazy. Conversely, if it's like that, it's way too active and you'll be jittering up and down. So the flatter a line is in our curve, the more resolution we'll have, because we have more dots across a percentage of rise. Let's say that's 1% rise, and we've got 100 dots there, as opposed to if it were like this, where we have 100% of rise across a couple of dots. If that makes sense, it's still the same distance up. Anyway, without waffling too much, and now my drone's cooled down a bit, I'm going to smash a battery in and get our first data point. And that data point that we're looking for is the hover value. So let's get in the goggles. Make sure that I'm recording. We are recording. And if you look in the bottom right, you'll see the throttle just there bouncing up and down. So let's just take off. We'll fly over here, away from the ground, where you have ground effect. And we can see we're 40, 41. So 40 we're going up, 39 we're going down. 40 maintaining hover, 41 going up, 40 maintaining, 39 going down. So we know that 40 is really where it's all at. So let's put this up here. It's horribly tweaky to fly like this. There we go. Next to my toothpicks. Very nice. Right, so we know our hover value is 40. At 41 we're going up in the world. Did I stop that recording? We know at 40 we're going up in the world. No, I didn't. Let's stop that. And at 39 we're kind of going down. So our hover value is basically 40. 40%. That doesn't actually mean it's 40%, as we're about to find out. But for the sake of the on-screen display, it shows 40%, and that's the number we're worried about. Or at least the number we're going to take and do stuff with. Right. Back into PID tuning, into your rate profile settings. We said 40%. If you need a battery connected to your drone to get receiver connectivity, do that. And we'll look at 40%, but not in the way you'd think. We're going to look at 40% output. And we're going to say that that is just on the edge of 28% input. Okay? Take that 28% input and smash that in as your throttle mid. And look what happens to the curve. It goes all a bit bananas. We've got this horrible peak. Obviously, if you were to fly it like that, it would be disgusting. So now we put a hover point in. And our hover point is going to be 10% above our throttle mid. So we'll round up 10%, which would be effectively 3, 10 or 11%, 0.31. Okay, curve still doesn't look great, but that's because we're not running an expo. We have a sharp uphill and then a less sharp increase all the way to the top. So we have by moving that point here to 0.32 or 32% output, by moving that hover point to here, we have created a less sharp upwards line at that point upwards. So we have more resolution from that point upwards. Now I'm going to add my expo in. That's going to add in quite a good amount of expo. It looks completely different to what we're used to, and that's because there's more of a plateau here. But just because it looks like this, it doesn't mean it would behave the same as the old BetaFlight 4.5.2, for example. If this kind of curve was in 4.5.2, it would be so lazy, it would be horrible. But it works this way, at least it does for me. Remember, it is subjective, and that's what's important. Now, if we try and look at what 40% was on the output, we're up here at 54% on the input, and that's clearly not right because it just isn't. Nothing translates anymore. If we put 41% on the input, that's probably not right either because it's 33% output. And I know this drone on 452 used to fly with about 35-ish% output, right? So this is where nothing really adds up, but don't worry about it too much. Trust the process. So, in short, I think the hover is, in actuality, going to be around about here, 44% input, which is 35% output. But that's kind of irrelevant. We're working with these numbers. It was 28%. We've added in 10, 11% on the hover point, and we've set our expo at 0.65. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And what we can see here is a nice flat area. So, seeing as we know that the actual hover point, which we'll see reflected in a moment, is probably around 43% input, 44% input, and that's what we should see on the OSD, is giving us now 35% output. When we come off the throttle, I've got a nice gradual run off the throttle, and I know at this point, at 32, 31%, the drone's falling out the sky. It's dropping massively, so we don't even hit this big amount of expo. This large amount of expo here is really a gap filler, because at this point we're zero throttle, at this point we're sinking fast, and we don't need a huge amount of control between sinking fast and zero throttle. We just don't do a lot in that space, we don't fly that. So to me that's a sensible use of that space. Ramp it up quick, I never fly there, and when I do I don't have to be accurate. My accuracy comes in from 30-ish% output all the way through, I'm going to say, to almost 45, 46% output before we start to head up this curve. And at this point we can see we're transitioning from a fairly flat curve into a more exponential up curve. And that's given us a huge amount to play with. And the reality is we're probably going to be flying somewhere around the 37, 36, 35, 34% mark here for our hover. At least that's what I would hope. 4 things to look out for here when we take it out for the next flight, or the actual flight now. We're looking for punch. So when I hit the throttle, is the drone overshooting where I want it to be, or is it undershooting where I want it to be? And we'll do the same for drop. When I remove some throttle, is it dropping too much or too little? So we want to work out which side of those we're at, and we'll translate that into some actionable number changes on the back end. Right, now that my 04 unit is about 4 billion degrees, or gas mark 6, I will pop the battery in. I hope we've actually still got some kind of visuals on this from the 04. lights on quick before it overheats. Let's get some air running through it. Yeah, it says overheated here. That's fine. Hit record. Okay, recording, got the fans on. So what did we say? We expected the throttle output value there in the bottom right to be around about 44. But again, it's going to be different on every drone, isn't it? And we are. We're about 44, 45%. So that shows that there is no kind of cross-referencing between input and output at all. It's just all up in the air at the moment. Well, let's just see how it flies. I'll go for a little rip, and then I'm flying this in level mode because I want to experience what it's like without all of the corrections on my roll and pitch. I want to be able to feel what the drone is doing on the throttle, and it actually feels pretty good. I think when I'm punching up, it's not punching up quite as much as I'd like it to. The sync, if I'm coming off the throttle, yeah, it's syncing about to where I'd want it to. I think that I'm altering the way I'm flying. I'm always seemingly adding in a bit more throttle than perhaps I would like or expect. What are my dropouts like? No, the drops are pretty decent. Loads of room to play with on the throttle. I'm probably moving it 2 or 3 millimeters here at this point, and it feels good to fly. I was going to try and land it on my head, but that's that idea gone. Right, let me stop the recording. Don't land a drone on your head, it's stupid. Okay. Let's put my other goggles back on. We'll hop back into BetaFlight, and then we'll make a couple of changes. Right, PID tuning, rate profiles, in the right profile. Now, if I was coming off the throttle and it was dropping too much, i.e. it was dropping down too quickly for my liking, I would lower my throttle mid. And I'm going to exaggerate what happens here, but I'll show you. Let's say we were hovering here at 31% output, 30% output, and we're dropping off, and like, do you know what? It's just dropping off a bit too quick. If I lower this value from 28, look what happens to the curve. It stretches out to the left. Yeah? And to maintain 31%, we're actually further to the right. See, it's bouncing along to the right, 32, 33% output. And we're moving this really weird dip over, way over to the left. But what we're doing is, because we're extending that out to the left, we are prolonging the point at which the drop-off occurs. So by lowering this by even just a couple of clicks, from going from 28 to 27 to 26, we are moving that curve further out to the left, meaning our drop-off is going to happen later, and at a lesser rate initially, a lesser rate. So if you find that you come off the throttle is dropping too much, lower the throttle mid by a number or 2. If you're coming off the throttle and it's not lowering enough, increase it. Whatever you do, don't go above the hover point, because if you do, look, weird stuff happens. Look at that curve, it's disgusting. I mean, if you want to fly like that, go ahead. But honestly, I would stick to moving just a couple of numbers to get this dialed in. At least that's what I found. Again, it's all subjective. You've probably found your own ways of doing this, and that's absolutely fine. You're allowed to do that, right? I'm not going to sit here telling you what to do. But this is the way I do mine. If I'm finding myself wanting a bit more punch out, then what I would do I would probably drop my hover point ever so slightly. So the reason for that is, let's say we're hovering around that 35, 36%. Let's just go on the base of 35 output, which happens about there. If I increase my hover point, look, it increases my output as well. So it means I have to be further off the throttle. So I'm flying more towards the back end. What this is ultimately doing, if I add in hover point, is I'm making it less reactive, and I'm increasing where the hover is. So if I want more punch outs, effectively, if I'm saying, oh, you know what, I'm flying here, but when I hit the throttle, it's not punching out enough, I could either remove some throttle expo, and that would give me more throttle immediately, so that's a good way of doing it. It also does take out some of the expo from the lower end, but not as much. So what I'd say is, first off, try hitting your expo. The other option you've got is to lower your hover point. And by lowering your hover point, you're forcing your dot, your throttle point here, to ride further to the right. You're forcing it to ride further towards this expo, but it does mean that your drop-off is going to be further away. And because that's going to be further away, I would say to increase that the same amount. So a real-world result around this would be, I'm not getting enough punch out, I'm going to go 0.32 on here and 0.29 to keep the throttle mid the same distance away from the hover point. And what I've done is I've shifted everything over to the right, effectively making my hover point ride further up into the expo, but I've also brought the tail off further to the right as well, so I've shifted everything across. The alternative, to say, is to lower the expo. Conversely, if you are coming into the throttle and it's behaving a bit too peaky, then you can increase the hover point. Obviously not that much, that would be crazy, but you can increase the hover point by a couple of points, and when you do that, let's say 31 to 33, you are bringing your throttle back, meaning you're further away from your exaggerated throttle curve. Of course, if you were to do that, you'd probably have to drop your throttle mid by the same amount as well. So in short, if you're coming off the throttle and it's dropping, lower this number. If you're coming off the throttle, it's not dropping enough, increase this number. If you're hitting the throttle, it's not going up enough, decrease this number. If you're hitting the throttle and it's going up too much, increase this number. If you want more response in the center of the stick, decrease this number. If you want less responsiveness in the middle of the stick, increase this number. Increasing this is going to make a larger, flatter area for you to have more control around the hover point. Decreasing it is going to give you a much snappier feel if you feel it's being a bit too lazy. I'm pretty happy with those settings, 29, 31 and 65, although I did say I'd quite like it to be a bit more snappy. So I'm going to take 3 off of my expo and simply do that. That should give me a bit more punch when I'm coming up the throttle to give me that initial jolt. Right, so we'll save that, get another battery, and go for another fly. I did have a monumental crash with this the other day, and I've broken 2 of the posts, so your FPV has sent out an orange and a yellow chassis for me to also pay for. There's only like £6 each. So I'm going to get them on there. Probably tomorrow when they arrive. Okay, so we're on board. Throttle's at 0. Let's arm the drone. Let's take off. Yeah, I've got a bit more zip on the throttle now. Okay, let's go for a flight down here. Because I do have down here some things to fly around. Oh, nipples. No, we don't need turtle mode. Let's try that again, shall we? Okay, let's have a little flight around here. Maybe not go for such a tight gap, but just see how it behaves. I'm not used to this because I've only just tweaked the thing. It does take an amount of getting used to, but it's punching where I want it to. It seems to be flying around where I want it to. It's probably a little bit peaky on the throttle now. Probably gone the other way. Increased that decreased the expo too much, but all in all, it's flying pretty well. I just feel like now on the throttle up, it's just being a little bit happy. It's a bit too keen to ramp up on the expo, so let's make that one final change. Let's make that one final change. Science. Is it good science? Is good observation, as Adam from Mythbusters would always say. Alright, let's have a look. PID tuning, brake profile. Yeah, so you can see if I bring that up, and we're concentrating on this area here, look at the curve. We're actually flattening out this part of the curve here by increasing the throttle expo. So instead I'm just going to bring my hover point up by 1 because I quite liked the way that expo was at 0.65, but I feel if I increase my hover point, I'll be riding further down here, which gives me a longer curve, but it means it does shove me back towards the drop off a little bit. So I'm going to try increasing my hover point to give me a bit more punch as opposed to reducing my expo. And like I said, that sounds counterintuitive. It really does, but it's how it seems to behave. Well, I don't know which battery's which here. One of them's flat. I guess we're about to find out. Let's find out. 3.66 volts. That's the flat one. Oh, I'm so glad I said I'd do this all in one shot now. You get to see all of the nonsense that I go through. Alright, in we go. What's this one at? 4.06. Okay, let's hit record on that. I should probably set up auto record again. Get that armed. Alright, let's go for a little flight. Just clipping things. My messy desk. Yeah, drop off feels nice. I feel like I've got a good sync rate going on. It's nice and controllable. The expo for the throttle has given me a nice wide range of movement, so I'm happy with that. It seems to be dropping at the right amount that my brain is expecting. Yep, even at the last minute I can kind of tuck through things, which is nice. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Of course, just about to crash. I don't really know what's in here, so it's hard to describe. So it's hard to work out where to fly because I have no idea what's going on in here. It's all a bit of a pickle. But it feels good. I feel that it is... Yeah, I've got a good range of movement throughout my throttle. I don't feel that I'm being particularly tweaky. It is punching up ever so slightly beyond what I'd like, but I think I could probably get used to that. The reality... Oh, is this going to be too close to the floor? This does have really fierce ground effect. Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, what I'm threading it through here is way beyond what I'd be capable of if this were in its stock format with the stock settings. So, yeah, I feel pretty comfortable with it. It seems to be doing what I want it to. The sync rates are behaving. Yeah, you know what? It's great. Can I go through here? 2.6 volts. There's the carpet. Really bad at going downstairs. Can we fly through these things? Yeah, we can. My chair keeps going back. Oh, that's me slipping on my chair and then crashing. Excuse time. Right, let's flip it over. But I will still maintain this feels really good. I'm happy with what's going on here. I'm happy with the way that it feels. I'm happy with the way that it's flying. I'm not happy with my flying. My flying is atrocious. But I do feel that I'm in way more control of this than I have been before. It does take a knock, this little thing. It's very confidence inspiring. Yeah, ultimately this is, apart from my wonky flying, doing at the best of my abilities what I'm capable of flying this at, or doing what am I on about? This man's blithering on again about nonsense. I'm flying this. I feel comfortable with this. I feel more comfortable with this now than as it did come out of the box. And the reality is, I'm holding pretty good level flight. It's behaving to my commands to throttle up nicely. It's behaving to my commands to drop to throttle off nicely. And yeah, I think it's doing very nicely. What more can I say? I feel like I've got good control over it, and that's all I really care about. And it's that simple. So let's go back into it and finalize those settings. I'll set them across the board and then just go for a quick once over again. So PID tuning, a quick summary, rate profile settings. We've got a throttle mid of 0.29, a hover point of 0.32, and a throttle expo of 0.65. If you remember our original settings, just simply set from our hover test were 0.28, 0.31 and 0.65. So in all honesty, that 10% over your throttle from your hover point is really close. And the reality is I could probably fly it like that, 0.8 and 0.31, and just get used to it. There's nothing wrong with it, it's just I slightly prefer what was going on with that. However, I'd probably do that, or I might do that. In fact, I'll probably keep it at that, just decrease that punch a little bit from the hover point. So yeah, that's where I'm going to save it. So it's trial and error, but you can get to this point really easy, by, like I say, by finding out your hover point and punching in that first metric, adding 10% as your hover point, and it seems to work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and keep those settings, and I'm happy with that. I think if I widened up the expo anymore, it'd become a bit lazy and a bit sloppy. I still want precision, but I still want it to be snappy. I still want that punch. I still want to be able to drop down and duck out things at the last second. Not that my flying's that good, it's not at that point yet, but you know, it helps. This all helps. And that's pretty much it for now. If you like this, then drop a comment below. Let me know how it's going for you. Let me know what your settings are and how this worked for you. Let us all know how this worked for you, in fact. And I'm only saying that because I want to have good engagement on my videos and get this out to more people. Now, honestly, I try to reply to all of your comments. It's one of the things I do like to do, and it is nice to hear that this kind of stuff resonates with you guys and actually has a slight impact on your flying experience, or for the better or for the worse, usually for the better. So anyway, this blithering idiot's going on and on again, but I hope you found that useful. Go ahead, have a play with this, have fun with it, enjoy, and I'll catch you on the next one. Ta-da!